I was on my knees, scrubbing the marble tiles, when the sound of crystal striking crystal rang through the ballroom. I looked up. The chandeliers shimmered, refracting the golden light onto gowns and tuxedos. A toast was being made, but what caught me wasn't the music of glass. It was the words. A man with silver hair, his voice steady and rehearsed, lifted his champagne and declared, "Tonight, we honor the Rosenthal family legacy. Every heir, every name that matters." Then he paused, almost too long, and added, "Except the ones who are never meant to exist." The words cut the air like bleach cuts into skin. People laughed politely, a ripple of unease behind the laughter, but my rag froze against the polished floor. I wasn't supposed to hear things like that, certainly not in the middle of a gala I was hired to clean after. My shift was meant to begin once the guests had finished with their displays of wealth. Yet somehow I had been called earlier, told that the stains on the marble couldn't wait until morning. So I crouched in the corner of a world not mine, invisible but present, my hands raw from disinfectant. I told myself to ignore it, to keep working. But the words replayed, circling in my head. Except the ones who were never meant to exist. As though existence itself were an offense. My rag slipped from my hand, sliding across the wet floor. It landed near the edge of a mirrored column. And in that mirror, I caught sight of my face against the glittering backdrop. Tired eyes, hair pulled back, uniform dark and functional. I looked like an intruder in their celebration, yet it was their words that made me feel trespassed against. I stood, adjusting the bucket, trying to make myself smaller, quieter. That was the rule: clean without being seen. Yet as I bent to retrieve the rag, a fragment of paper, damp and folded, peeked out from under the bucket. Someone must have dropped it. Instinct told me to discard it with the other debris: napkins, confetti, broken stems of roses. But there was handwriting across it, visible even in the low light. I shouldn't have opened it, but I did. The ink was neat, deliberate. "Elena," it began. That was my name. My breath caught. I scanned further. "You were never supposed to carry this burden in silence. If you are reading this, then the truth is already trying to surface. The Rosenthal estate is not whole without you." The paper trembled in my hands. My heart pounded so loudly, I thought someone might hear. I looked up. No one noticed me. They were still clinking glasses, discussing investments, sipping gold from fragile flutes. I folded the letter, slipping it into the pocket of my apron, the way I tucked away spare keys I found while cleaning hallways. I wasn't sure if it was a mistake or a warning. I worked mechanically through the night, but each sweep of the mop felt heavier. The ballroom, with its polished floors and walls of mirrors, became a place of distortion. My reflection stretched and split. I thought of the bleach smell lingering in my nose. It had always meant erasure, the attempt to make everything pure, spotless. But purity could sting, could burn skin until it peeled. When the last guest drifted out and the music faded, I remained. The words on the letter had settled inside me like dust that refuses to be swept away. The next morning, after a restless few hours of sleep in my small rented room, I returned to the estate. I carried my cleaning supplies like armor. The bucket, the mop, the gloves I rarely wore because they made me clumsy. The head housekeeper gave me my list: kitchen floors, guest bathrooms, staff corridors, routine. Yet every hallway felt like a corridor of questions now. I waited until I was alone in a utility room before unfolding the letter again. I examined the handwriting, the signature at the bottom. It was faint, as though pressed with hesitation. R, nothing else. My stomach twisted. Rosenthal. I thought of my mother, long gone, who used to avoid questions about my father. She worked as a laundress. Her hands always raw from soap, her answers always vague. When I asked her once, she said, "Some stains don't need scrubbing, Elena. they're better left alone. At the time, I believed her silence was protection. Now I wondered if it was exile. I tried to dismiss it, but the letter wouldn't let me. It became heavier each hour, pressing into my pocket like a hidden stone. That night, after my shift, I sat by the narrow window of my room and studied it again. The words were too precise to be random, too personal to be coincidence. Days passed, and I began to notice things I hadn't before. Whispers among staff about heirs fighting over shares. Old photographs lining the hallways, where faces blurred but names were engraved in brass. In one, a woman who looked faintly like my mother stood near the edge of a family portrait, unnamed. Her eyes carried the same tired dignity I saw in my own reflection. One evening, after cleaning the upstairs study, I stumbled across another piece of evidence. A folder left on the desk, its corner weighted by a crystal paperweight. I didn't mean to pry, but the folder had shifted open, revealing a hospital record. The name leapt out before I could turn away. Elena. My own birth date, my mother's name listed. Father. Confidential. My knees weakened. I pressed my palm against the polished wood to steady myself. I should have placed the folder back untouched. But something in me, a force like bleach cutting through grime, pushed me to read further. The record was notarized, stamped, official. It didn't name him directly, but the file code matched the Rosenthal archives. I tucked the copy into my apron, heart racing. The study smelled faintly of cigar smoke and leather-bound books. It felt like a place where secrets were cataloged, but not meant to be dusted. That night, the dreams came. I saw myself scrubbing floors that never stayed clean, the water in the bucket turning red, then black. I saw my mother folding linens while tears stained the fabric. I saw mirrors cracking under the weight of reflections no one wanted to admit. When I awoke, I decided I would not be silent. The chance arrived sooner than I expected. The Rosenthal patriarch had scheduled a press conference at their corporate headquarters downtown. It was meant to reassure shareholders after rumors of internal disputes. The staff was called to prepare, polish, make the lobby gleam. I was assigned to buff the mirrored walls of the grand entrance, to make them spotless for the cameras. As I worked, I felt the weight of the letter and the hospital record against my chest. Two truths, folded and hidden. They pressed into me with every stroke of the cloth, every sweep of the mop across the glossy floor. I watched my reflection multiply in the glass, fractured yet persistent. When the conference began, the lobby filled with reporters, flashing lights, the family arranged in a line. I stood to the side, invisible yet present, rag in hand. The patriarch cleared his throat, his voice amplified across the room. The Rosenthal legacy, he began, is built on strength, discipline, and loyalty. We are united. I felt my hand tighten on the rag. My throat burned with words unsaid, but silence was no longer an option. I stepped forward. My shoes squeaked against the floor, echoing louder than I expected. Heads turned. For a moment, no one spoke. Then I said, quietly but steadily, "You forgot someone." The room froze. Cameras swiveled. The patriarch frowned, his silver hair catching the light. "Who are you?" he demanded. I pulled the folded papers from my apron, my hands trembling but firm. "I am Elena, and this is proof that your legacy isn't whole without me." Gasps spread through the room. The patriarch's face paled. I held up the letter, the record, my voice unwavering now. "You cannot scrub away truth. You cannot polish mirrors until they forget what they reflect." For a second, the silence felt eternal. Reporters leaned forward, cameras aimed, their red lights blinking like eyes that refused to look away. The patriarch's hand twitched, as though he might order someone to remove me, but he hesitated. He knew before even reading that the papers in my hand were not fabrications. His hesitation was my opening. I stepped closer to the mirrored wall, deliberately standing where the lights made my reflection sharp. I wanted him, and all of them, to see not just me, but the truth mirrored back. My voice shook at first, but I steadied it. This letter, I unfolded it slowly, was written to me by someone within your family. It acknowledges what you all pretend not to see. I held up the hospital record next. The paper fluttered under the lobby's air conditioning, but its weight was undeniable. This is a record of my birth, my mother's name, my date, and your archive code linking me to this family. You can deny my face, but you cannot deny the ink. The patriarch's eldest daughter, draped in silk, stepped forward with a sneer so practiced it seemed permanent. This is absurd. A cleaner spinning fantasies for attention? How convenient. Her voice cut, but it wavered. Reporters shifted, sensing fracture. One called out, "Will you allow an independent review of the documents?" Another, "Is this a hidden heir?" Their questions filled the air like the sharp sting of disinfectant. I clutched the papers tighter. My palms were damp, the smell of bleach lingering faintly from my morning's work. It comforted me strangely, reminding me that cleaning had always been about revealing what was hidden under grime. That was all I was doing now. The patriarch finally spoke, his tone controlled but strained. "You think a piece of paper gives you claim to our name?" I met his gaze, refusing to shrink. Not a claim. A truth. Names can be hidden. Floors can be waxed until they shine. But stains always resurface. For a moment, I thought they might dismiss me, bury the story beneath wealth and influence. But the cameras were still rolling, and the lobby was full of witnesses. The polished mirrors behind them reflected their unease. A man in a dark suit, one of their lawyers, stepped forward to examine the documents. His expression was taut. He whispered something to the patriarch, who stiffened visibly. That was when I knew I wasn't wrong. "Enough," the patriarch barked. "This matter will be dealt with privately." But reporters pressed closer, refusing to let the story be swept into silence. Is she an illegitimate heir? Was there a cover-up? The flash of cameras was relentless. I didn't wait for permission. My mother worked her hands raw, in silence, raising me without ever asking for your money or your power. But she left me with dignity, and dignity is what I am reclaiming here. I wasn't shouting, but my words carried. They struck not with volume, but with weight. The family tried to usher me away, but the murmurs among the crowd had shifted. Some whispered my name as though testing it, placing it alongside theirs. Elena Rosenthal. The sound was strange, but it echoed with inevitability. Later, when the lobby emptied into chaos, a reporter found me outside. She pressed a card into my hand, her voice urgent. "These papers will be verified. If they're real, you've just exposed one of the city's biggest secrets." I walked home in the fading evening light, my hands trembling, the card warm in my palm. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I felt hollow, as though a long-buried wound had been reopened. My small room felt even smaller that night. The mop in the corner leaned against the wall, silent witness to my unraveling. I thought of my mother, folding linens by the dim bulb of our kitchen, humming softly despite exhaustion. She had never spoken his name. Perhaps she believed it would poison me, or perhaps she feared it would consume me. Days passed in a blur of calls and questions. The documents were authenticated by notaries and cross-checked with archives. The letter's handwriting was matched against signatures. Even the hospital record bore a seal no one could dispute. Each verification stripped away another layer of denial. Still, the family resisted. They accused, deflected, suggested fabrication, then fell silent as the evidence grew. But silence, too, was an answer. One afternoon, as I scrubbed the floor of the staff hallway, one of the younger Rosenthals passed by. Unlike the others, he didn't sneer. He looked at me with something like curiosity, maybe guilt. "If it's true," he murmured, "then you've been in our house all along." I didn't answer. My mop glided across the floor, leaving behind a trail of water that shimmered before it dried. Cleaning had taught me patience. Stains yield slowly, but they yield. The confrontation came formally, as I had known it would. A boardroom, long and imposing, filled with polished wood and silent portraits. They wanted to end it within their walls, away from cameras, but I insisted on witnesses, legal representatives, a notary, and a handful of reporters granted entry. I walked into the room with my documents in a simple folder. My uniform was plain, dark, freshly laundered. I had thought about wearing something else, but in the end, I wanted to appear as I was. Not pretending, not performing. The patriarch sat at the head of the table, his children flanking him like sentinels. Their eyes were sharp, some angry, some wary. I placed the folder on the table and spoke carefully, measured. "This is not vengeance. I am not here to destroy you. I am here because truth deserves light." I slid the documents across. The notary opened them, read aloud, confirmed the seals. His voice was calm, professional, but each word was a hammer striking the silence. The hospital record, the letter, the archive codes. Piece by piece, the puzzle became undeniable. The patriarch's hands clenched, knuckles pale. His daughter whispered furiously, but her words dissolved under the weight of proof. The lawyer shifted uncomfortably, avoiding my eyes. I said softly, "My mother scrubbed floors like these. She taught me that what's hidden in corners eventually spreads. Dust grows, mold creeps, unless you face it. That is what I'm doing now." One of the reporters, a woman with steady eyes, asked the patriarch directly, "Will you acknowledge her?" Here, now, in front of witnesses? The room held its breath. His jaw tightened. For a long moment, I thought he would refuse, that pride would outweigh everything. But then he spoke, voice low and hoarse. "I cannot deny what is written." It was not warmth, nor acceptance. It was reluctant surrender, but it was enough. I exhaled slowly. My hands trembled under the table, but I kept my gaze steady. "Acknowledgement is not enough," I said. "Dignity requires more than words spoken under duress." The reporters scribbled furiously. The notary marked the acknowledgement. My name, once erased, now existed in ink beside theirs. I left the boardroom not triumphant, but changed. The city outside looked different streets the same, yet somehow less suffocating. For years, I had lived as though I were invisible. Now, whether they liked it or not, I had been seen. But seeing comes with weight. That night, in my room, I stared at the mop and bucket in the corner, symbols of my labor, of silence. I thought about the bleach, how it stripped surfaces clean, but left burns if mishandled. Truth was like that, cleansing yet scarring. I wondered what my mother would have said. Perhaps she would have warned me again, told me to let stains remain. But I also knew she would have seen the dignity in standing upright, no longer bowed. News spread quickly. Articles ran with headlines about hidden heirs, long-buried truths. My name, once tucked in shadows, appeared in print. Some praised me for courage. Others called me opportunist. I read none of it fully. I had lived too long in silence to let noise drown me now. Yet the family did not leave me in peace. Lawyers sent letters, carefully phrased, warning of complications. Invitations came too strained, polite, asking for meetings to discuss resolution. I attended one, sitting across from the patriarch in a smaller room this time. He looked older, tired. "You have made your point," he said, "but you don't understand the damage you've done." I met his gaze. Truth doesn't damage. Lies do. He sighed, leaning back. For the first time, his voice carried less venom, You look like her, you know. Your mother. The words cut deeper than I expected. I clenched my hands under the table, steadying myself. Then perhaps you should have said her name sooner. We said little more. He offered no apology, only silence. But silence, again, was an answer. The weeks that followed felt like walking on polished floors, shiny, slippery, never secure. My life shifted in ways I could not fully control. Strangers recognized me on buses. Neighbors whispered in stairwells. Some treated me with sudden deference, as though my worth had risen overnight. Others avoided me, fearful of entanglement with a name too heavy to touch. At work, things changed too. The head housekeeper, who once barked instructions without eye contact, now stumbled over her words. Some staff looked at me with awe, others with resentment. But I kept scrubbing, sweeping, carrying my bucket. I needed the rhythm, the grounding. My identity might be in headlines, but my dignity was in the slow, deliberate act of cleaning. Yet the Rosenthals did not relent. Public acknowledgement had been forced from them, but private acceptance was withheld. They invited me once more this time to a gala in the museum they funded, a showcase of paintings and sculptures that bore their name. I hesitated. Part of me wanted to refuse, to remain outside their circle. But another part knew that absence would be read as retreat. And I had come too far to retreat. The night of the gala, I wore no gown, no borrowed luxury. I wore a simple black dress, modest, with shoes polished until they shone like the floors I had tended for years. As I entered the museum's vast marble hall, the sound of heels and murmured conversations echoed. Eyes followed me. Some curious, some hostile, some calculating. I walked past displays of art worth more than entire neighborhoods. Yet what mattered most that night was not the canvas or stone, but the documents I carried in my bag-authenticated copies of the letter, the hospital record, the notarized acknowledgement. I carried them not to prove again, but to remind them that truth does not vanish once polished over. The gala unfolded in glittering routine. Champagne trays, speeches about philanthropy, cameras flashing. But beneath the veneer, tension simmered. Reporters had been given limited access, and they, too, watched me closely. At one point, I found myself near a sculpture of a woman carved in white marble, kneeling, head bowed. The plaque described her as allegory of silence. I stared at it, feeling both kinship and defiance. I had knelt long enough. I had bowed long enough. Then the moment came. A toast, once again, as though history had folded back onto itself. The patriarch raised his glass. His voice trembled only slightly. Tonight, we celebrate endurance, our family's unbroken legacy. I stepped forward, my voice clear. Unbroken only when you admit the fractures that exist. A ripple of gasps spread. The museum's acoustics carried every word, amplifying them. He glared at me, but cameras turned, eager. I continued. This legacy includes those you erased, those who cleaned your halls, raised your children, and carried your silence. You cannot polish marble while ignoring the cracks beneath it. The patriarch's eldest daughter hissed, "Not here, not now." I turned toward her, my tone steady. Truth does not follow schedules. A reporter raised her microphone. Do you deny her place still, despite the legal acknowledgement? The patriarch's face hardened. He seemed ready to lash out, but then something shifted. Perhaps exhaustion, perhaps recognition that resistance only deepened the fracture. He lowered his glass slowly. The record stands, he said, voice heavy. She is blood of this family. The words echoed, solemn and reluctant, but unmistakable. Applause rose not thunderous, but steady, like rain beginning on glass. Some clapped out of conviction, others out of performance, yet it filled the hall. The museum's mirrored floor reflected their movement, their hands doubling in silent affirmation. I stood still, breathing deeply. This was not triumph. It was acknowledgment written into air, into public memory. Something that could not be erased, not even by wealth. After the gala, I slipped into a quiet corridor of the museum. The noise faded. I leaned against a wall, exhaustion seeping through me. My reflection in the glass case nearby looked older, wearier, but steady. A voice startled me. It was the younger Rosenthal again, the one who had once looked at me with curiosity. "You've changed everything," he said softly. I shook my head. "No, I just revealed what was already there." He nodded slowly. "Sometimes that's the hardest thing." We said nothing more. But in his eyes, I glimpsed something rare among them, the possibility of respect. In the days that followed, legal processes unfolded. Lawyers quibbled over inheritance, over shares, over responsibilities. I attended some meetings, declined others. My aim had never been wealth, and though offers were made financial settlements, opportunities, I refused anything that felt like hush money. What I asked for instead was simple yet profound. A scholarship fund in my mother's name for women who worked in silence, whose labor was unseen. The idea was met with resistance, but public pressure left them little choice. Eventually, they agreed. The day the fund was announced, I stood in front of a small crowd at the city library. My voice was steady, minimal, for I had no need for grand gestures. "This is not revenge," I said. "It is repair. A name once erased is now remembered, not for its silence, but for its dignity." There was no applause, only quiet nods. That was enough. I still cleaned, not for them, but for myself. The act was no longer invisibility, but ritual. Each swipe of the cloth, each ring of the mop, reminded me of what had been hidden and what had been revealed. Cleaning was never about erasure. It was about recognition. To see the floor beneath the dust, the mirror beneath the smear, the truth beneath the lie. Sometimes, late at night, I opened the letter again. "You were never supposed to carry this burden in silence." The words had freed me, but they had also marked me. Silence was no longer my inheritance. Truth was. I did not reconcile with the patriarch. He remained distant, a man built on denial. But that mattered less as time passed. What mattered was the fund in my mother's name, the acknowledgement in ink, the knowledge that dignity could rise even from polished marble floors. One evening, I returned to the museum alone. The allegory of silence. Sculpture stood where it always had, kneeling, bowed. But I no longer saw myself in her. Instead, I saw the cracks in the marble fine, nearly invisible, yet real. Cracks that proved strength was not in denial, but in endurance. I touched the cool surface lightly, then stepped back. My reflection wavered across the polished floor, not erased, not hidden, simply there. The world outside had not changed. The city still hummed with wealth and want, power and silence. But I had changed. I no longer felt like a stain to be scrubbed away. I was part of the floor itself, enduring, visible, impossible to erase. And as I walked out into the night, the air cool and sharp, I carried nothing but my name. Elena. A name once whispered in shadows, now spoken aloud. A name that belonged not just to me, but to every woman who had ever knelt on cold floors, rag in hand, waiting for the day someone would see her reflection and recognize her worth. The museum doors closed behind me with a soft echo. I breathed in deeply, the city lights shimmering like mirrors in the distance. The night smelled faintly of rain, of possibility. For the first time, I felt clean, not scrubbed, not erased, but whole.